Do you think we could ship all of the LiDAR lasers using a fleet from the Jones Act?
Oh my God!
Which was created after World
transition
War
goal.
I to help preserve shipping lanes in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know we were dealing with a professional.
That's the thing
here.
about the Jones Act, Doug. We wouldn't.
What?
We choose not to do it because of the
What is
Jones
the
Act.
coincidence?
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I like it. Us not getting into this so we can have something that me and you know, but he
Yeah,
doesn't.
like a little
You guys
secret.
just keep
Yeah.
referencing around it, like the Jones Act. And
Oh, the
you're
Jones
smiling.
Act. Classic Jones Act.
You put on you put on earmuffs. I don't think you deserve this.
Teach me about the Jones Act, AI
Well,
tutor. Teach me.
Your AI tutor is loading his Jones Act. I thought this would be interesting to talk about because I've heard about this law coming up in a bunch of videos explaining shipping logistics in like different parts of the U.S. So I watched a video about like, how Hawaii handles their like shipping between islands or from the mainland, and then a video about basically the decline of Puerto Rico and how the Jones Act affects Puerto Rico. And then I was like, this is really interesting. And I think at a time when like tariffs especially, but I would say protectionism in general is a big talking point of the Trump administration, fans of Trump, like the idea that we're isolating as Americans and becoming better independently, and we don't need to rely on this like global economic system anymore. Things like that. So the Jones Act it started in 1920, was put in place in 1920 in the wake of World War I.
Okay.
The Jones Act is a law that requires any like water-based shipping, so even on a river, to be done by a ship that was built in the U.S., owned by a U.S. company, and crewed only by Americans.
USA.
Very
country
pro-USA law. And the idea was, in the wake of World War I,
Sorry, any ship that's delivering to America, or what do you mean?
any ship any ship that is delivering goods between American ports.
Okay, yeah, I was like, because China wouldn't send a ship here with. Okay, sorry, any American to America.
So the way this law, an example of how this law affects things now is, say there's a Chinese shipping company, right?
Yeah.
And they have a boat that they built in Korea.
Okay.
And that boat picks some stuff up in Long Beach, and it is not allowed to pick up stuff in Long Beach and then bring it to Seattle. That's illegal.
Nowhere else in America.
Nowhere else in America.
Can they make a round trip to Cuba and stop there and then?
Okay, so that's the weird thing is yes, technically, if they interrupt the trip by going somewhere else first, they can then
they just
go
do that probably
to
all the
America.
time?
No, but they don't, because
Okay.
there's not a ton of like use cases where that is super effective.
Okay.
There's a similar law that applies to passenger boats, and they do that.
Okay.
So that's why all the ferries that go from like Washington to Alaska stop in Vancouver. All of them. They have to.
So they have to like ping pong between countries
because they're not on Jones Act compliant ships.
That's so funny.
So basically the idea was, if we put this protectionist law into place, the US will always have a thriving like maritime shipping industry that is not only good for America on the whole, but is good for like military and like security reasons. So when we get into a big naval war, we have like a shipping fleet to deploy.
Okay.
But what they didn't plan for is that
there were no downsides.
There were no downsides, and that
End of the episode.
our thriving American shipping industry. The problem we've arrived at is they didn't expect global shipping to like blow up as much as it did in the future after the fact. And
I love his cute little notebook. Yeah. They make fun of him on the yard so much when they watch
the notebook.
This. Yeah, because they never seen him like this, so they watch this show and they're like, he's got his little notebook. Usually he's talking about piss and shit and farting.
Piss and shit and
I like the idea that the yard just becomes this like Mystery Science Theater. They're just watching our show, making fun of Aiden the whole time.
That's all they do. But ships started getting built in other places outside of the U.S. because it was way more cost effective to do that.
Yeah, I mean, can I say a stat?
Yeah.
55% of all shipbuilding globally is done in China.
Yeah,
now.
and dude, get this. As of 2018, and this was the trajectory was still going up. 91% of shipbuilding happens in China, Korea, and Japan. So the entire like shipyard industry, like ship manufacturing industry in the US, it just doesn't exist anymore. All of these companies went out of business, and they don't have enough Jones Act compliant clients to like keep a business open.
There's not enough demand from that.
So it was funny because when I was reading through this, there was like the paper that I was reading was from 2020, and it was talking about how few shipyards are left in the US that even make these types of ships anymore. And it was like, and one of the few remaining ones is about to close. It's called like the Philly shipyard. So I looked up this shipyard. The name of that shipyard now, the Hanwha Philly Shipyard.
A true American institution.
In 2024, it
Don't
had been
talk shit about Philly, the Eagles, or Hanwha Shipping.
It had been bought. It had been bought by a South Korean company.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's a South Korean company.
yeah.
So isn't it? That's. It was really funny to like. Oh, that happened. It got bought out. And the consequences of this, in short, are that we have a really limited supply of compliant boats that are even able to fulfill this purpose anymore. They're more expensive to use. So for any goods that like Hawaii has to get, for example, or coastal states in general, the price of goods shipped on those things is like really, really expensive because there's only a couple companies that even do this type of shipping. So there's way lower supply. They're way less efficient, and they charge way more because they basically have monopolies on the industry.
There's no competition. Yeah.
And this grand like shipyard industry that was meant to produce, like having this giant fleet and all these companies like protected, actually has crumbled and fallen apart. And the people that suffer the most are like a really explicit example is the Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and like devastated Puerto Rico a couple years ago, right?
And they were turning around ships for the Jones Act?
And that was a big thing is like they couldn't get emergency supplies because the Jones Act affects those ships. And they had to, they were requesting to like lift the law for a period. And Trump eventually caved and lifted it for a week. But he said, basically the companies that benefit from this like really don't want us to do this. That's like, and during Hurricane Katrina, they did the same thing. It's like this law is so harmful that during disasters, they literally temporarily remove it.
Right.
Because
Otherwise,
of the
a few
effects
companies will surcharge. Yeah.
But even like day to day, like things like fuel supplies are either way more expensive or less accessible. Or these places turn to maybe foreign countries instead because they can offer those goods at a way lower price. So you're losing like the economic benefit from that.
Yeah.
And then also anything that you would ship over water that might be cheaper normally gets pushed into like other transportation industries in the US that are like further burdened. Like the supply of shipping space in the US brought to you by like things like trucks, trains, etc. is stretched thinner because the boats aren't really an option.
So I see two options. One is we as a podcast advocate for the repeal of the Jones Act, which would be pretty cool of us. We do like a really powerful.
Yeah.
Or two, we start an American-owned shipping company. Take advantage of this monopoly situation.
That's what our Patreon tier is. You get to ride on our boat.
You get to be the crew on the boat.
As long as you're an American citizen.
As long as you're American.
You have to pretend to be. We'll give you an American flag shirt.
They pay us to work on the boat. So we can undercut the current monopoly. This is big.
Why didn't any of the boat companies think about this?
Like think about this. Think about our plan.
Right.
Because
why didn't they make a podcast?
If the boat companies had just opened a Patreon and asked people to work for them,
they could have made some real money.
But the reason that I was thinking about this a lot and why I thought it was interesting is because while the benefactors of this would be the remaining people that get
to work on ships in the US.
Work on a ship in the US and keep your job. Because honestly, if foreign companies were competing, the remaining shipping jobs that exist here, albeit very few, wouldn't exist at all because they'd be getting outcompeted by who actually staffs ships now, which is like Filipino and like Indian workers who are much cheaper to pay.
Right.
And the boats cost way less.
And the boats cost way less
like
to
half
make.
or a third of the price or something to make a boat in China or Korea.
For better quality.
Yes. It's like we just have old, behind on shitty, old expensive boats that you then have to use to move something from Puerto Rico to Florida.
Yeah, that's what we have to.
Yeah.
And the new an example of like an industry that existed way smaller scale back then is like natural gas. They get moved around on big tanker boats. American tanker boats do not exist. There are none. It literally doesn't exist. So a place like Puerto Rico that might be able to get like natural gas, which we produce. I don't know if you know this. We've been drilling.
I do know this.
We've been drilling.
We're kind of a natural gas goats.
A lot of W's for America.
You could send American gas to Puerto Rico at like a really cheap rate, but because this law exists, that you can't do that. And then a lot of that excess gas would get sold to like other countries, and then Puerto Rico's buying their gas from other countries.
Dude, there's so much of that happening. There's so much of like, we put like a restriction on buying Russian oil or something, and then Russian oil just goes to India and then goes from India to, you know, like if Europe restricts it, they just go to India and then sell it to Europe.
The circumvention of tariffs is so interesting.
Or like Vietnam is like thriving because it is not China, but you can just put something from China to Vietnam, slap a sticker on it, and then sell. Like there's all these ways of getting around tariffs and protectionism, and it's okay. So with all this being said, I think we can agree this rule's not working. But I personally think that America having some sort of shipbuilding industry is valuable, especially in a world where, you know, they're at tensions with China. Having all of it there is kind of spooky in that world. So do you have any thoughts of like what you would do to could you solve this problem for everyone?
If I could just solve this quickly right now, this like huge geopolitical issue. Well, that's the thing, right? Is like this law actually has nothing to do. It didn't protect that at all.
It didn't protect it. It didn't work.
And so we're in a worse spot.
Yeah, this makes no sense.
Compared
like, this
to
not done anything.
Even back then. I don't really have the answer. Like you'd have to like.
Why do I listen to this show?
If we're not going to solve the shipbuilding crisis in America, then why are they tuning in, Aiden?
The only thing I can think of is
put on the Patreon.
You would have to.
The solution
is right on the Patreon.
Trump, if you're watching, the solution is on the Patreon. You have to do the tier 3.
We'll tell one person on our boat.
One lucky tier 3 subscriber who works on the boat.
We'll whisper it to
we'll whisper it to them as we send them off into open water. I think. I would love to hear a better approach or answer. The only thing I can think of is stuff similar to like the CHIPS Act, right? Like you have to subsidize and like basically invest and spend a bunch of money to making a ship in the US cheap enough to make it competitive. That's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, and then
from what I know.
Yeah, and my understanding is arguably it's like so. This is what we're doing instead of the government subsidizing a shipping industry is we force Americans to pay more to get their stuff shipped. And particularly like Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Alaska, just have to pay way more for all their shit because it has to be shipped on these boats that are old and expensive and there's not very many of them.
Terrible.
And so the biggest advocates to repealing the Jones Act are Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Alaska, anybody who doesn't live in the contiguous United States because you just have to pay way more. So arguably, instead of our government subsidizing our shipping fleet, it's Puerto Ricans like subsidizing our shipping fleet and just paying
taxing these 3 states to give the money to small dying shipping companies in America.
Right. Like it is ridiculous.
Which are like price gouging and
when you put it that way, it's kind of based.
Like we have Hawaii as like a very important state that everybody loves, and then we're just like, but we're gonna make it super expensive for you guys to get anything. It's like it's wild. I would lean more towards just straight up government subsidies because I just don't think it makes sense. And I know free markets have downside, but like in this case, I would rather our shipyards have to compete and we have a smaller amount that are actually good rather than what we have, which is a bunch of expensive, slow, shitty fleets, and then everybody's paying more for stuff. I just don't see how this benefits.
There's a funny story about Hawaiian farmers choosing to air in cows to the mainland instead of using boats because of this law.
Dude. That's like a Far Side cartoon. 3 cows in first class.
That's what the Wright brothers were imagining. They're like, finally, Hawaiians can get their cows easily to California.
Yeah, it's not wild. Like it's not like it's all roses on the other side of this. Is like, okay, well, what happens when you let like full competition take place? It's like, you know, there's a bunch of scrutiny of the quality of work conditions on boats and the low wages you get to pay these people from the Philippines and India that often staff these boats. Like, it's not like the other side is like filled with good. It's just that there's a bunch of people in the U.S., particularly in those places, that suffer because of this decision.
Yeah.
And the only people that benefit are the people who have the monopolies on the remaining shipping left and like the people who have jobs at those shipping companies. And at the individual level, I'm sure they would like to keep their jobs. It's kind of we didn't talk about this on an episode, but we did talk about this together. Was the efficiency of ports in the US versus like the efficiency.
Oh, we did that.
Right.
This. That was one of our first conversations where we were like thinking about doing this podcast.
Yeah.
And it's a, there was a big, it was when we were at the dinner, like where we were talking about like what we wanted the show to be. And I thought that conversation is very similar. It's like, obviously people want to keep their jobs and do not want to suffer in the wake of a decision that would repeal this law, right? But how many people are suffering on the other end because this law exists?
Other side, for sure.
I think it's like, I don't know the number. I believe it's like either 100,000, between 100,000 and like a couple 100,000 people are employed by the Jones Act shipping stuff. So it's like you lose that, and that's not insignificant.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
But then again, the other side of the coin is there are millions and millions and millions of people in the United States in various areas who are paying way more, basically, so that those people have jobs. And it's like, is that, dude? The other thing that I would be more stoked about repealing the Jones Act if Trump was not burning all of the bridges with Japan and Korea, who are the only ones who could make our ships if we go to war with China. It's like, I generally am all about free market, but then when you also burn the bridges to the rest of the market, then it's like,
you have to be able to make it yourself.
Right?
You can't do both.
I mean, that's one thing I've read about a little bit, which is bigger conversation. But like, if we go to war, as far as my understanding, like America is completely porked right now. Like, we can't build ships, we can't build most of our stuff. All the raw materials comes from other countries. So like, we just would not be able to build things. And then I don't know if that helps or hurts that if we repeal the Jones Act and then there's more competition. I don't know, man. It's a little dire.
I think regardless, hopefully there's no war with China, right? But regardless of that, I think this Jones Act is not doing what it was intended to do, which is protect American shipbuilding.
I'm actually pro. I think we should just
trying to get it over with.
It's the villain seat.
Okay,
Drop in the comment.
Xi Jinping. You always are talking shit on my man Xi.
He's
the GOAT.
No, we're buds. Have you seen my Discord profile picture right now?
Do you see this?
Yeah, you're with
his profile to like
Xi
a
Jinping.
communist flag with Xi Jinping.
Somebody like drew me hanging out with Xi Jinping with the yard and Chinese flag waving below us and F-35s flying above us.
I know what's happening. He's a sleeper agent from China here to destroy our shipbuilding industry with this fake propaganda about the
ships.
The law is so bad. It's
all
so
written
bad.
in Chinese. It's all written in Chinese.
Comes in here with this.
So sick. I open up my next notepad.
It's all Mandarin.
Comes in with your little white book trying to spread your lies to the youth.
But yeah, I just thought one thing it was making me think of as a final note, and I would love to hear if people in the audience have like more thoughts about this too, is this something that had, I think, obviously good intentions fell apart because of like other factors outside of the law that it could not control. And then the complete purpose of the law was like totally
subverted.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if there's, when you look at protectionist legislation in the future, what are the little loopholes and potential consequences of that? So I don't know. It was interesting.